very quickly, my name's Ruth Phillips. I'm your chair for today. I'm a partner at Shakespeare Martineau and I head up the construction team. Over the last 15 years, I've developed a wide-ranging education practice, acting for a number of higher education clients on their estates plans, further education clients as well. And I've seen sustainability move to the forefront of my clients' requirements. So can I introduce our panel today? First up, as we've heard, Andy Nolan. Andy is Director of Sustainability at Nottingham University, and he's got 15 years of experience working in the field of sustainability, both in the private and public sector. And he's responsible for providing strategic direction to the university and for delivery of a comprehensive and progressive sustainability strategy, further developing and embedding sustainability to improve the university's campus, curriculum and community sustainability. Next, can I introduce Jeremy Bungay? Jeremy's, as we've heard, is an independent consultant at Woodley Projects. Now, Jeremy is recognised as one of the leading figures in the development of district heating across the UK. He's a chartered accountant by background, and he created and ran the UK market-leading district heating company whilst at E.ON. This included developing the now standard new build district heating ESCO concession model, as well as contracting and operating over 40 district heating projects across the UK. He was also a founding director of Heat Trust and now sits on the Heat Network Industry Council, a body set up to drive forward the district heating market in the UK. And finally, can I introduce Sushma Maharaj? Sushma is a partner at Shakespeare Martineau as well. And Sushma is a renewable energy specialist and advises on a full range of projects and transactions within the energy sector and renewable energy sector, and also on district heating projects. So today we've been asked to look at sustainability and the issues that's coming out of the sustainability trail set by universities. Now, universities are under increasing pressure to decarbonise and green their campuses and have set themselves really ambitious targets by which to achieve this. Now, what are universities doing? What are the challenges they face when shifting towards clean energy and low carbon solutions as the UK moves towards net zero by 2050? So first of all, my first question is to Andrew. You've worked as a sustainability director for a number of universities now. What sustainable solutions have you typically seen being involved with at these universities? And what new sustainable solutions would you want to introduce at Nottingham University in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I think over the last decade or so, we've seen many universities that have trialled and tested out many different technologies, particularly been involved in operational challenges around buildings, wider estate. And my feeling is, what I've seen is that a lot of universities have got some really good showpiece exemplar buildings. Every one of us have one that we kind of particularly proud of, and then they'll often use a range of technologies and standard approaches in how they build that. So, I've seen a lot of different approaches taken in my time, and I would say, it's great to see over the last sort of 10, 15 years, as the university sector's grown and the states have grown, the universities have taken the opportunity to break through to higher standards in new build in particular. So they're moving on from just BREEAM very good to BREEAM excellent and outstanding, but now adopting other standards like a passive house and really driving down demand for carbon emissions for energy and carbon emissions building. Bigger challenges around retrofit, of course. A lot of us have got large estates been developed over many decades, even centuries, and the much bigger challenge around how we do those buildings and spaces. But I guess I can point to a whole range of technologies that are adopted in order to drive down carbon emissions. Biomass and whether it's biofuels, solid biomass, used biomass and CHP. Gas CHP was very, very popular 5 years ago. Now the decarbonisation of the grid, much less so. Gas is going to be our real challenge. But we've done, schemes of solar PV, solar thermal, Heat pumps of air, ground and water have been trialed. You know, we've seen things like green roofs introduced standard in many new build projects, sustainable drainage, loads of work that's gone on around chiller plants, environmental control, particularly research areas, laboratories, particularly with. Some have made great progress in wind. I think Lancaster probably a standout example of that, but you know, there are opportunities much more around this. And then, you know, heat networks for me have been an area of real interest and development. I first met Jeremy when I was working with Sheffield City Council, and we worked collaboratively on a scheme where we were looking to develop with Don a heat network in the Lower Don Valley, which was an exciting project. And universities, many universities have got networks like this around the country, and we're working with colleagues in the sector to identify how we can upgrade some of those heat networks. But going forward, I mean, I think for a start, all of the things that we have done are still valid, and we can still do more with them. It's about scaling that up. And instead of doing small-scale solar or small-scale heat networks, or even individual heat pump schemes, actually the challenge now is to do these things at scale, not just on our own campuses, but in partnership with other civic partners. So it might be a neighbouring hospital, might be a local college, it could provide a regeneration scheme. Much greater emphasis on repurposing and retrofit for sure. So a much more around a fabric-first approach to drive down demand and improve of quite often leaky and non-airtight buildings. Taking on the adoption of new standards, I think passive house or standards like that are going to become much more mainstream and all sort of setting. And I've mentioned it already, but the alternative to gas is going to be absolutely crucial for us decarbonising our estates. So, you know, I read with interest what government's plans are around hydrogen, biogas in recent days. So, you know, I think there's some real technological investment needed, and some of the challenges around that are going to be politically, financial and technological risks. Then there are going to be other things that we will need to address, like opportunities around offsetting or indeed insetting. So how do we deal with those emissions of greenhouse gases difficult to deal with on our campus? And to do all of that in the context of a resilient climate campus that takes into account where future climate is taken, with greater differences in temperatures, in energy of the wind, and seasonality. So I think it's, you know, a fantastic, exciting time to be involved in all this, but no less, it kind of does head scratching moments for.
Thanks for that, Andy. That's really insightful, actually, especially the idea of civic partnering to work together with other partners in the community to bring these plans together. So that's very interesting from my perspective. Jeremy, turning to you now, what new sustainability solutions should universities be thinking about? They're obviously thinking of quite a few at the moment. So what should they be thinking about as they aim to green their campuses? You know, for example, heat networks, some of the things Andy's been discussing, heat pumps, solar generation, battery, hydrogen. What else can they be thinking about at this time?
Building on what Andy has said, my focus is really about heat. So heat currently accounts for about 37% of UK carbon emissions, and it's probably one of the hardest areas to decarbonise. But it's very clear, and as Andy picked up, is that we're going to have to move away from gas. You know, so the government paper in December 2020, on white paper, suggested phasing out gas boilers by mid-2030s. And I think there's an inevitability that we're going to have to go and announce measures to reduce or remove gas boilers from the system. Just like your diesel and petrol cars will be phased out, gas boilers will be phased out. And that's an enormous change from where we are, because in the UK, we've come to rely on gas as our main form of heating. So where does that leave us? And then again, picking up on what Andy has said, there's a few options available. Heat pumps are probably the main option that people will go for. And that can be air source heat pump, water source heat pump, ground source, or one project I'm working on is a sewer source heat pump. which is quite interesting, if not messy. Alternatively, hydrogen and potentially ammonia could be sources of energy for heating and waste heat recovery. These schemes always and generally work better at scale, both scale in terms of to get economies of scale in terms of the financials, but also in efficiency. And this is where district heating comes in. So I know a number of universities already have district heating schemes, but the district heating solution is a means of allowing these technologies to effectively plug into a network to transport heat across a campus, a town, a city. And what we've seen in the last 10 years or so, and particularly in London, is a huge number of new district heating schemes taken off. And we're just starting to see local authorities, councils progressing large city-scale, town-scale district heating schemes. And this could play very neatly into the university campus and work together in those communities to develop those wider energy systems. And it is an energy system. So although I mentioned it's heat, producing the heat, if we're going to use heat pumps, comes from electricity. And therefore you can plug in PV, battery systems. And one of the other features of this, it's going to get awfully much more complex. I mean, it's a pretty complicated system at the moment anyway. I've worked in the energy industry for over 20 years, and it still baffles me at some of the things they do. And it's going to get more complicated with local flex products, storage, seasonal time of day tariffs, a whole bunch of stuff that's coming. And the network, a heat network, can provide a basis on which to bring these technologies and solutions together, and could work, as I say, very well for a university and a wider community.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. So really, we all seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet here. We're all kind of basically saying we need to be working together for the economies of scale and for the the financial costs. Because I presume, Jeremy, all these solutions just sound incredibly expensive, actually, don't they?
Well, it doesn't come cheap.
No, I didn't think it would, and obviously that's going to be an issue for universities going forward with it's decisions they take, how they do this most cost efficiently, and obviously maybe sharing the cost of this with other partners will be the way forward. Perhaps, Andy, is that something you're discussing at Nottingham?
Yeah, I think up to the point we certainly will exploit that. I mean, quite often we have scale we're a big university with big campuses, so scale is there, but absolutely I think the advantage we have is that we can take a long-term view. We're not in lease space generally, we're owner occupied premises and real estate, and so the challenge is partly one of accounting, actually. Over what period of time do you want to write some of the costs off, and how do you future-proof your networks and investments to take into account future growth. One of the challenges, as Jeremy will know, is when you're planning a big network, it's knowing what you're going to do in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, getting the right infrastructure in place to do that. But yeah, absolutely, we see the opportunity to work with partners. We created a University of Nottingham initiative, so we work very collaboratively with Nottingham Trent and through a civic agreement hospitals and the local authority in the city to develop plans, because we're all behind this same objective, a carbon reduction in line with Paris.
Thanks for that, Annie. Now we've got a question here, and I would like to kind of throw it in at this point, actually. So the question is, it's come through via the WhatsApp group. I'm very excited. Is the current unit cost of heat too low to support transition to the new technologies, for example, heat pumps, etc.? And would the introduction of a heat carbon tax to increase the cost be necessary to shorten payback and transition from gas in particular? I suppose that kind of follows on, Andy, what we were just saying about the cost of it. Jeremy, have you got anything to add to that question?
It's a very good question, and there's a lot behind that question. So I think it's first of all, it's worth saying that low carbon doesn't mean low cost. So if you're trying to provide the same amount of heat from a heat pump, it's going to cost you more than it is from a gas boiler at this point in time. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is that gas is very, very cheap, and it carries less carbon tax than electricity does at this point in time. So the questioner is pointing to that. That may be one of the answers. The challenge we have is, how do we develop business cases for the decarbonisation of a university or a town or a city or a block of flats, and develop and deliver value for money for customers and investors. And as I say, it's not easy at this point, given that the gas is currently the counterfactual, the comparator, the heating solution of choice, and it's at this point, as I say, is going to be more expensive to heat via those technologies. Having said that, I'm building on your earlier question. There is a growing market for investments in this type of technology and type of solution. We're putting in a new form of infrastructure across the UK, whether that's starting in a university or hospital or a town. There's investors willing to invest in that infrastructure, and that, as it grows, will bring down the costs. And as more and more heat pumps are rolled out, the cost of heat pumps should come down. So it should become more competitive. But at this point, there's quite a big challenge.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. And we do have another question already, which is fantastic. But it feeds into this, so I think it's best to ask this question now. Ongoing maintenance of sustainability measures needed to be factored into future budgets. Somebody's mentioning. They've said, I've discovered that my university's PV and solar thermal systems weren't operating as maintenance cancelled as a cost savings. What's being done to raise the profile of this? I'm not quite sure if I understand that question, but does anybody here understand what that question? I think I'm not sure if they've cancelled the system.
I'll try and answer it, Ruth, if you like.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, when universities are faced with budget challenges, I guess they'll look at ways in which they can cut corners on things. And, it might be a solar PV scheme, it might be a gas boiler, it might be a lift or whatever. I think one of the things that I'm always do, and one of the things I do actually, is look at the downtime on our renewables, and then try and understand what the cost, carbon implications are. So if you give your maintenance arguments a bit more strength, it's better to show it in terms of cost of the cost could have avoided, and the carbon saved. But yeah, it's a familiar challenge, and you can't just put in these renewable schemes, even relatively low maintenance like solar. Most people think pick it on and leave it. Actually, still does need some degree of upkeep.
Thanks for that. So moving on to the next question. This is a question to all three of you, but Sushna, you've been very quiet, so I'll let you go first. What challenges do you foresee regarding the shift by universities to lower carbon heat networks and more off-site renewable energy solutions? So Sushna, I'll let you say something now.
Well, I see 4 immediate challenges. The first one is universities and sustainability managers having to take a very holistic approach as they develop their sustainability plans and decide on what energy solutions package they need to put in place at their campus. And this very much would be driven by the students at the university, the users of the campus. What do they want? What do they require? What's the experience that they want to have when they come to that university? Now, that already is a huge challenge as we come out of a post-COVID world, but even more so when we start to transition to low carbon technologies, because once you kind of have that knowledge at the forefront of your mind, you then have to do a lot of upfront work at the design stage to build a sustainable energy solutions package around that. And so much of this is interlinked, because if you're kind of getting rid of a gas CHP run district heating network and putting in a big heat pump, then you've got to think, well, it's not only a heat pump, it's because the heat pumps run at a lower temperature, it's a heat pump plus upgrading the fabric of buildings on the university campus as well. So first challenge, I would say, is having an integrated, holistic approach and doing a lot more at the design stage, increasingly so than ever was the case before. And you know, one of the ways of doing this is to appoint someone to help you look at the different kind of solutions that you can do and the viability of them, because obviously cost is a big issue, and electrification of heat, as we've just been speaking, is going to be more expensive, and you've got, as a university, to recover that in some way from the fees that you charge. The second challenge I see is regulatory changes. So you're going to have to be, as a university sustainability manager, making so many of these decisions at a time when, more than ever before, the energy and heat sectors are in a constant state of flux. So just, you know, in the last 6 months, we've had, you know, the energy white paper, which is the sort of government plan. This is the government's roadmap for the UK energy policy on the road to 2050. And that all talks about increasing the use of heat pumps, hydrogen, heat network zones, green gas in the grid. So there's an electric vehicle rollout. So there's a lot going on there. And the energy white paper refers to a lot of strategies that still haven't come out yet. So we're still waiting to see the heat and building strategy that's due to be out soon, the hydrogen strategy, the EV strategy. So you're having to make decisions without having the sort of detail, the devil in the detail out there for you to kind of decide on which solution you're going to go for. We've also had, you know, a future building standard that has come out, which means that the building regulations are going to change by July 2022. And that would mean prescribed fabric standards for buildings and reducing carbon emissions in our non-domestic buildings by 27%. There's also been the building market framework for the heat sector, which proposes to a new regulatory regime for the heat sector. So whereas before heat network operators, or currently heat network operators, sign up to a voluntary trust scheme, heat trust scheme, in the future it is proposed that they would be authorized under an authorization regime administered by Ofgem. So you have heat network operators having to think about what regulations would be in place for them when that authorization regime comes in, because under that regime, they would have to promise to adhere to certain technical standards, certain customer protection standards. Ofgem are going to have the ability to impose certain rule-based principles to do with pricing. So if you are a university and you are trying to do a concession agreement or an ESCO services agreement with a heat operator, they are having to think about a lot of these things, which will inevitably impact on the agreement that they are trying to put in place with you. There's also going to be heat network zones. So it may be in the future, a local authority may, through planning and building regulations, mandate your university to connect up to a heat network in your sort of local area. And of course, under the regulatory piece, we also have changes to the electricity license regime. So there's currently out now a call for evidence on whether there should change whether or not you need to have a license, an electricity license for certain things. So it's the electricity license exemption regime that is currently up under review. And this is particularly applicable to universities, because if you're deciding to go for a heat pump and then get an electricity supplier from a licensed electricity supplier into your site and then use private wires to supply that electricity around your campus, whereas before you didn't have to have a license if you can fall under the exemptions, and you didn't have to pay a charge for the use of those private wires. It may be in the future you do if these exemption rules change for licenses. So we've had one, the holistic approach to having an energy solutions package, the regulatory changes. Thirdly, cost. And this is something that we were talking about earlier. Electricity being more expensive than gas. If you go for a heat pump and licensed electricity supply, you're going to have to be thinking about how you can reduce the costs. And that could be solar panels that connected to batteries, and EV charging points as well. And you're going to have to think about possibly entering into an agreement, a managed services agreement, with somebody who will come in and optimize your assets. So your battery, your solar panels, your EV charging points. They will buy electricity when it is cheap, put it in the battery for you to use when electricity is expensive. And you're also going to have to think about how you can encourage the users of your campus to use electricity when it's cheaper to use it than when it's more expensive to use it. So cost and how you get those costs down, and how you have innovative solutions to deal with that whilst you're on a university campus, that's also going to be an issue. And the last and fourth one, funding. If you can bring yourself under the eligibility criteria in the £320 million government loan and grant HNIP scheme, or Heat Network Investment Project Scheme, or the proposed £270 million Green Heat Network Fund, which is aimed at, it's due to come on in April 2022, and it's aimed at transitioning existing existing district heat schemes run on gas to more low carbon solutions. If you bring yourselves within these two, grant and loan funding or the public sector decarbonisation scheme, great. But if you can't, then that means using some of your own funding to kind of put these solutions in place. And BEIS, one thing to mention is BEIS has also launched Beehive, which is a platform for funders who are investing and financing in the heat network space. So it's a platform where universities can go to look for funders outside of the government grant and loan schemes. So there we have it, 4 challenges, and I haven't even got to procurement rules for universities and planning. Although, having said all of that, I don't think any of this is insurmountable.
Thanks, Sushma. Andy, Jeremy, have you got anything to add to that?
Well, I think Sushma gave a great overview of some of those challenges, and yeah, certainly I think the way in which we, technologically, I think there is a challenge. Many of us with heat networks have got, first and second generation heat networks. Jeremy will tell you what a 4th or 5th generation heat network looks like, and it's different in some quite practical things. Sizes of the pipes, the pressures and the temperatures to operate at, fundamentally different. I think one of the factors that we would want to take into account, of course, is disruption. So when you've got a live, effectively organisations the size of a small town, you've got to keep them running throughout. So there's only times in the year when you might want to disrupt your systems. So interestingly, the latest call on the public sector decarbonisation fund would probably draw you to installing heat networks through the winter, which is kind of crazy, not likely something we want to do. So there's definitely something around disruption. I think in financial terms, I think Sushma makes some really good points around this. And it's fair to say that, energy generation, heat generation is not core business of universities. They've done it because they've needed it. But actually the private sector is an option for us, as well as looking at grant and our own investment. And I do think it's a really interesting points that Sushma made there around eligibility for grant, but also the Beehive initiative as well.
And the only thing I would add to that is the customer. I touched on it, regulation coming in, heat trust, etc. The crucial part on all this transition is going to be taking customers on the journey with you, whether that's commercial customers or students or residential buildings. The service has got to be of a high standard, and the pricing needs to be fair and competitive. one of the features of district heating is the lack of choice for the customer, and therefore actually customer protection should be much greater than it is currently in the gas or the electricity markets, and that's a real challenge as we develop these things out over the next 5 to 10, 15 years.
Oh, I'm off mute now. That's good. Thanks for that, Jeremy. Sushma, you made one interesting point, and I must admit I'd read somewhere that you said about encouraging students to use less energy. Now, Andy, is it true at Nottingham University that you've been having Ben and Jerry parties for the halls of residence? I'd read this in the press actually, that the halls of residence that use the least amount of energy get a Ben and Jerry's. I would have thought students might have wanted something else, other kind of party, but you know, is that true? Is that what's been happening?
Yeah, so we do run a competition within our halls to try and encourage responsible behaviour across a whole range of things, actually, waste and recycling, and energy consumption. But it is a challenge. You know, we've got a transient population every year. There's a new cohort come in. You have to kind of go through a process of re-educating. You know, at 18, 19 years old, undergraduates perhaps aren't as motivated by some of the things as other people might be. But you know, what we've got to try and do is create a culture within the university of responsibility. And you know, we do hear, and we do get lobbied by our students to do more. But it starts with lots of individual behaviours as well as big institutional investments and changes in policy. So yeah, we'll try anything actually. You know, ice cream does work up to really pleased to tell you that just in the last week or so, we launched a new app called Green Rewards. And in the city of Nottingham now, both Trent University and ourselves use the same platform, and it's a phone app. It basically encourages students and staff to make sustainable choices, and it rewards them, gives them the opportunity to win prizes. And we know that there's a degree of motivation there. What we also know is that not everyone's motivated to do the right thing for the university, but they might be motivated to do the right thing for the planet.
Excellent, thanks, Andy. So I'm going to turn to our final question, and then I have got some more questions on the WhatsApp group. So finally, Andrew and Andy and Jeremy, how can the university sustainability plans be integrated into students' curriculum? Great question. I hope you've got an answer.
I'll try my best. I think this is something that many universities are taking different approaches to. Some are mandating a kind of standard module to take, and I think that has its merits. You know, it gives everybody the opportunity to have a fundamental understanding of what the issues are. What we're seeing as well, though, is increasingly professional bodies, professional standards looking for these things in accredited courses. So we're seeing, you know, kind of subjects that you might expect, science, engineering, to some degree medicine, are starting to have these things driven through by professional standards. So if you want to go on to become a chartered accountant or a surveyor or such like, you would most likely have gone through some sort of. But I think there is a real challenge around this, and the responsibility to the university in educating our students. That hasn't gone away. I think some are still wrestling with parts. You know, I can say hand on heart, Nottingham is wrestling with some of that in parts of the curriculum, but it's changing and rapidly.
Thanks, Andy. Jeremy, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, as I said, we're undertaking a seismic shift in the way we use and generate energy in the UK, and that feels like it must have a knock-on effect to the training and education of the professionals to come. You know, so we're going to need a lot more engineers who are understand district heating and heat generation and energy management. There's an IT angle here. As I've said, the system's incredibly complicated, and I've seen some very intelligent energy management systems that use artificial intelligence to learn how the building operates. And so there's an angle there. There's obviously environmental. There's, we touched on earlier, customer behavior management, understanding how customers behave and how do we encourage people to use the right amounts of energy in the right times. And clearly, as we develop this, it's going to get much more complicated. We're going to need a lot more lawyers. So there's clearly an angle there to educate more lawyers in this exciting world of energy.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. What an exciting thought. Lots more lawyers. I'm sure everybody's thrilled by that. So we've got some questions to finish on. We've touched on a few as we've gone along. And apologies if we don't get to everybody's, but the next question, and this is something I remember studying about when I did my surveying degree. In Australia, regional governments are looking to encourage universities to do more refurbishment and less new builds, citing this being the most sustainable form of building. I remember the discussion about how much energy it takes to produce a brick and things like that. Apart from not doing anything at all, does the panel see this encouragement happening here and elsewhere? And I suppose that's one for you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So I don't feel we are doing that, to be honest. I don't see that the government is pushing refurbishment in as many ways as it might do, and yet it makes a lot of sense to go down that. Quite often, you know, it does appear to be easier conceptually to design something with a blank sheet of paper. I think there are things that the government could do to incentivise that, and there's probably a whole load of things around tax that someone better qualified than I can talk about some of those incentives. You know, there's a lot to be said for better accounting of embodied carbon in existing structures, and you know, quite often a lot of that embodied energy is lost through a process, you know, of renewal and demolition. So I do think there's scope to do a lot more. I think we're coming out of 10, 15 years of new build growth. And I think I said earlier, there's great opportunities to reinvest in our estates, reimagine them. There's a really important thing here. Universities have got a lot of stall in their heritage. You know, going to study and work at a university that's got longevity, history, proud tradition of often means that it comes with a long-standing estate. Reinvesting in that is a good thing. All round, you know, it's a good thing for the environment. It's good for the student, good for our, you know, our forward plans. I just think government needs to think about some of the tactics it might deploy to retrofitting networks or can be challenging. So you need to look at some sort of relief, financial relief or technical relief. Great.
Thanks for that. And the next question, and I've just been working on a project using organic sustainable materials. So this is quite an interesting question for me. President Macron has recently, doesn't mean I'm going to answer it though, so I'll leave it to the expert. President Macron has recently decreed that new public buildings financed by the French state must contain 50% wood or other organic materials by 2022, under an ambitious plan for a greener urban life. Should we be encouraging similar initiatives over here? It's back to you, Andy.
Yeah, no. Well, I'll try. I'm no expert in this at all. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? And you know, things often aren't as black and white as, you know, policy suggestions like that often suggest they are. So, you know, I think you've got to look at the outcome that you achieve trying to achieve. We had a similar debate over the last couple of years around single-use plastic, which was, you know, deeply evil, and actually, there's appropriate use of plastic and inappropriate plastic. And provided you're using it correctly and you're adding value, why wouldn't you? There's been lots of counter arguments. The issue with plastic has been it's ended up in a fundamentally not been managed through the life cycle appropriately. So, you know, I think it's really interesting what President Macron said about timber. Timber has definitely got a role to play, and we now see the technology around new build skyscrapers with timber in Asia. We've built a carbon neutral laboratory in Nottingham, completely but with a timber frame most throughout. And it does play a big contribution to carbon neutrality. But there are trade-offs, of course.
Thanks. We've got a final question here. So it's great to have the new build that's a low carbon exemplar on campus, but how much of this is a poster boy for marketing the university to students, research investors, as well as a response to a challenge to do something from senior management? That's quite a tough question, actually.
Shall I have a go at that one then?
I think you should have a go at that one, Anthony.
Well, there is some of that, isn't there? You know, there has been lots of buildings built to demonstrate just what, how big and powerful universities can be. So exciting architecture, and I'll say now, Nottingham has got this example. What I would say is that quite often done not as poster project, but more importantly, it's about demonstrating technologies, a forward-looking agenda for institutions like ours. And so, yes, I would say there are some projects which have achieved that better than others. I'll point again to our carbon neutral laboratory at our Jubilee. It's a stunning building. I mean, it is, irrespective of its carbon neutrality benefits and the vast amount of timber that it used in its construction. One of the things we did through that process was measure absolutely every single element that went molecule by molecule. So we know how much copper's in there, how much wood was needed to build it, and indeed how much concrete there is in the platform of that building as well, the plinth. So although it was a very stunning building, and it often backdrop of photo shoot, it's not its potentials as a sustainable building which stack up. I think the challenge we have is when you've got a limited capital pot, you've got to decide how you use that, whether you invest that in existing buildings or new buildings. What you should ultimately be trying to do is get a net reduction in carbon emissions.
Can I ask you a question on that? Because that feeds into obviously what I do as a day job. That building, was it very heavily specified, I presume, before you handed that over to the contractor? Because you obviously knew what you wanted. Did you have to go out to a specialist contractor for that? And did you know who you wanted to go out to because of what you were asking them to do?
It was a very closely managed process. So we knew what the objective was when it was competition in order to find the right solution, the right idea. Obviously, to achieve that, you can achieve it in many ways, which goes back to the kind of point around Macron saying it's got to have this much timber in it. Well, there are many ways in which you could achieve that same outcome. The outcome that we chose was, a heavy timber frame building with a south-facing, almost like a conservatory, which allowed some warming of the internal temperatures through sunlight, and PV on the roof, and bio energy CHP system. So there's a whole range of different ways in which you do it. But yeah, we worked very closely with the contractor. So the solution wasn't there right at the very outset. Sure, we didn't have the answer. They didn't have the answer. We worked collaboratively to land on a solution that worked for all parties and had a proportionate amount of risk in there. And I think that's one of the challenges. When you're using new technology, there's loads of risk.
Andy, can I just ask, from my perspective, just out of interest, do the students get involved at all when you decide to do sustainability, initiatives on campus? Is that part of something that's integrated in their curriculum? Because obviously these universities are going to be pushing out the people who will be really taking the green agenda forward as we stride towards 2050.
Yeah, one of the things we're really proud of, Sushma, is that we try to involve our students in the major decisions of the university wherever we can. So, for example, we have student representation on our sustainability committee, and all number of the subgroups that are involved in that as well. when we commission projects and we have project management groups put up, there's always a student representative involved in those. So they're there to give some student voice to it, sure. Yeah. And then, of course, when the building's, when the building's being built, we often share a lot of the information. So there'll be live blogs and webcams and various other things, so people can see it. Some students are going to be more interested in that than others. Yeah. But certainly our architecture students are. And if you come to our campus and have a look at our creative enterprises, you'd see there that these are kind of exemplar test beds, where not only do we try out new designs and new technology, we also have residents in them who are living in them as a normal family. These are being monitored, interactively engaged.
And I'm afraid to say on that note, as devastating it is, we're actually out of time. That has gone by so quickly. So can I say thank you to the panelists this afternoon?